This here is a car that needs no introduction. It's only the best-selling C-segment SUV here in Malaysia, and it's also arguably the model that really helped revive Proton as a brand. So why exactly are we here again? This is the updated 2022 Proton X70, although you probably wouldn't have realized it unless you've been told specifically what to look out for. I mean, it really doesn't look any different at all. The only new things here are basically some blacked out touches here and there around the outside, as well as a new set of wheels. I'm not really too big of a fan of the gloss black touches, especially around the front fog light housing, but these wheels here I think really looks very nice, giving the X70 a more classier, more atas appearance. But with that being said, they are not exactly new either. These 19-inch units are borrowed from the limited edition SE model that was launched here in July last year. But yes, that's all of the changes around the outside. Everything else has essentially remained the same from the original X70 that stormed into Malaysia some 4 years ago now. And in automotive years, that's actually a very long time. Don't get me wrong, it's still a very handsome car, especially from the back in my opinion. But with the Geely Boyer Pro, Boyer X and even the Boyer L now available in China, I think the X70 here is really starting to look a little dated, don't you think? It's also the same story on the interior, with the entire cabin pretty much unchanged aside from the new black coloured headliner. But while we may still be okay with the outside looking about the same, it's sadly not as peachy on the inside. It's kind of disappointing really, because even though they've stuck with the same thing for 4 years now, there are still no improvements to some of the UI annoyances that can actually get pretty grating to use when you're living with the car. The worst offender of all, I think, is the control scheme for the instrument cluster here, because you first have to click on this trip button on the left side and wait for the steering wheel button to activate the so-called instrument cluster mode, which you then use the buttons to flip through your pages and settings. But God forbid you take more than 1 second between your button presses, because once you take a longer break, the buttons here go back to the normal infotainment mode, which you then have to go through the entire process again, taking an embarrassingly long time when all you want to see is just your remaining range. And you can already imagine how annoying it is when you're actually driving down the road. The volume buttons here is arranged opposite of the normal and logical left down, right up orientation, and when you touch on them, the direction doesn't even match with the on-screen display. These seats here on the premium variant do come with seat ventilation, but I honestly forgot about them because they are hidden in the menu on the infotainment display itself, instead on this bank of buttons over here. Speaking of displays, it's already disappointing enough that you don't get Apple CarPlay or Android Auto connectivity, but for some reason it's still running on the old GKUI operating system instead of the new Atlas OS like the X50 does. Isn't this supposed to be the flagship model? Now I know I may sound like I'm just nitpicking at this point, and to a certain extent I kinda am, but that's only because the rest of the cabin, especially in this premium variant with the smooth Napa leather upholstery, is just such a nice place to be in, and all of these small annoyances, they just really do stick out like a sore thumb. Now before you say that I'm only picking at the negatives, well, here are a few things that I really do like about the X70's interior. There's a USB port located above the rearview mirror here for you to plug in your dash cam, which means you don't need to route the cables along the gaps over here, saving you a lot of time and potentially money. There's a built-in air purifier in the armrest over here, which I think in this post-COVID-19 world is a very valuable addition to every car. And if you've ever checked these things out on Shopee, you know how pricey they can get. The 360-degree camera here is actually pretty clear, but what I like the most about it is the fact that you can actually rotate it freehand like a video game. There's a 3D model of the car over here, and check this out. You can even see the interior right here. So then, looks and equipment aren't the main highlight on this 2022 update. In fact, Proton doesn't even call it a facelift, instead labeling it internally as MC, which stands for minor change. But despite the name, we think the update here is actually pretty significant.
And that's because the Proton X70 now gets the same 1.5 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged engine from the X50. And I know, I can already feel the keyboard warriors out there warming up their fingers to type out the meanest comments. But before you do that, I implore you to actually check out how the car performs when we take it out onto the open roads. For some reason, a 3-cylinder engine is almost like a trigger word on the internet. But I think if you actually get the chance to try out a modern 3-pot mill, I think your opinion on it might actually start to change. And this one here is almost as modern as it gets.
In this TGDI form, the 1.5-litre turbocharged 3-cylinder engine makes 177 horsepower and 255 Nm of torque. And even though it's lower than the previous 1.8-litre engine on paper, especially in terms of its torque output figures, it doesn't actually feel all that different in real-world use in terms of performance.
And that's already obvious when you just look at the spec sheets. The 0 to 100 km/h time is rated at 9.8 seconds, which is just 0.3 seconds slower than the existing 1.8-litre model. And in real-world driving conditions, that's basically nothing. In day-to-day driving, I don't think I've ever felt the need for more power here, be it driving around in the city or even trying to overtake on the highways. And when you pair it to a smooth shifting 7-speed DCT gearbox like this one over here, well, power delivery, especially on the highways, is just really smooth. Unless you're comparing the two engines directly one after another, I really don't think you'll feel that many differences between them, or even at all. But what really impressed me about this engine is how refined it actually is. Because there's barely any vibrations from the engine when you're seated inside the cabin, whether it's idling in traffic, cruising, or even under hard acceleration. To be clear, there is some, and you can actually feel it in the steering wheel over here, but we are talking about very marginal differences, maybe about 5% compared to the 1.8 turbo engine.
This engine here is developed jointly between Geely and Volvo, and it's basically taken all of Volvo's existing experience with odd cylinder count engines like the inline 5s and distilled it into a modern package. There are more than 10 parts in the engine designed to combat NVH, and specifically on this X70, there's also a new foam noise damping engine cover to help keep engine noise to a minimum.
And when you pair it to the pretty impressive cabin insulation of the X70 itself, the car is actually pretty quiet on the move, well, except when you need to take off from a standstill while going uphill, because the powertrain does seem to struggle a little bit. But when you get out of traffic and get onto the open roads, the X70 here is actually a really comfortable long-range cruiser. It has a kind of supple but still firm ride quality, which means all of the larger road undulations are all soaked up nicely, but at the same time it also doesn't feel like you're just floating down the highways, giving you a little bit of connection to the road underneath you. And to be honest, I think the ride quality here might actually be one of the best in the segment, and even better than some of the premium SUVs, twice its price. The suspension is tuned for comfort and cruising, so don't expect any of the Lotus ride and handling over here. The car does feel a little bit top heavy, and when you try to attack a corner, the top half does actually kind of feel like it wants to drift out a little bit. But if you really want to tackle the back roads, then ask yourselves again, why are you even looking at a tall riding family SUV?
And just in case you still don't believe me, how about we hear what an existing X70 owner actually thinks?
So obviously I know who you are, but for the benefit of our viewers, can you just tell the camera your name and what car do you drive?
My name's Kuberen, you can call me Kub for short, and I drive a X70 Executive.
So how long have you owned the car? What, 2 years now?
2 years,
Almost
about 2 years.
Okay. So for the past 10 minutes or so driving the car, have you felt like there's anything different?
When I first got in the car looks different, it's black.
Look, oh, in terms of looks, right?
Okay.
But what if in terms of driving?
There's no significant difference.
No,
Yeah.
okay. So the reason I actually asked you that is because this car has actually a new engine in front instead of your 1.8 turbocharged 4-cylinder. This one is actually a 1.5 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged engine, so it's actually smaller than your engine. That's why I asked if there's any difference in power. But you said that not a lot?
Not a lot.
Not
actually,
a lot, okay, okay. But aside from power itself, a 3-cylinder engine, because it's a imbalanced engine, if you know how a 4-cylinder engine works, they sort of cancel out each other. But in a 3-cylinder engine, you can't really cancel out the forces of the piston, right? Theoretically, it can be maybe a bit more rattly, or maybe a bit more noisy, but
Again, I say that if you didn't bring it up, I wouldn't have noticed. But
okay.
I do notice a small bit of a noise,
Okay.
but that's when it stopped to start. Meaning like from a traffic light, then if I accelerate, I do hear a bit of a noise compared to my current car.
okay. What about vibration? Like now we're driving, do you feel like something extra vibrating, or is it
I noticed it when I guess it was idling. I mean during taxi.
idling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
okay.
while driving. Doesn't make that much of a difference.
So you see, it's not just me who said it, right?
Yeah.
He said that it's not that much of a difference. So another main reason that Proton said for the change of the engine is actually for fuel consumption. You as a Proton X70 owner, you probably have experienced or even heard about it online that the X70's fuel consumption probably not the best, right?
I remember checking to compare with a friend before. I think it was 10.3, 10.4.
10.3, 10.4. Do you mind actually going through the instrument cluster and just checking and let me know what figure is in there?
Okay. Considering you drove this car before me, not sure how you drove it, but still about 9.3, 9.4.
9.3, 9.4,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not gonna do the maths lah. I would say it's about a bit less than 10%.
Yeah.
So obviously it's not a apples to apples comparison. We might have different driving style. I've been driving this car, he has been driving his car. But I would say theoretically there should be a reduction in fuel consumption purely on the fact that it is a smaller engine, right?
Woon, so you said it's 1.5, right? So 1.5 means the road tax is cheaper than what I'm paying now?
I don't remember the exact figures, but it's definitely cheaper, probably in the hundreds. Yeah, so on top of saving fuel, you also save about $200 or so in your yearly expenditure. I mean, it's not really that much in terms of like grand scheme of things, but well, every penny saved is a penny saved, right?
Yeah.
Now then, that's the price. Even though the engine has been downsized across the board, save for a single 1.8 litre premium variant, the pricing for the X70 has actually gone up. And that's before we mentioned that the new 1.5 litre engine is actually locally assembled here in Tanjung Malim. Obviously, Proton won't tell us why pricing has gone up, but there's actually a lot of factors that goes into a car's price, with the most obvious one being our weakening Malaysian ringgit. And in a car that still uses quite a bit of imported parts, that unfortunately means that pricing has naturally gone up. But even with its new higher pricing, I think that the X70 is still the best value for money C-segment SUV that you can buy. And you know what? Even if it's priced the same as the Honda CR-V, I think that it still offers enough to make it the default choice. For more information on the new 2022 Proton X70, do log on to AutoBuzz.my. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button below and share it with your friends. But if you didn't, tell us why in the comments below. Also click on the subscribe button for more videos like this, and the little bell icon beside there gives you the notifications to all of our latest videos.